Good morning, Year 9. Welcome to your final video lesson of this week. Today we are going to shift our focus to non-fiction and we are going to focus on a new skill of analogies. So, could you pause the video now, copy down the title, date and LO. Press play when you've got that copied down, please. Okay, if you're back, that means you are ready to complete the do now task. I would like you to copy the below sentences, adding parentheses. Remember, these can be added with brackets and dashes, and if you remove the information inside the parentheses, the sentence should still make sense. Pause the video and complete the do now task, please. Okay, if you're back, that means you've copied these 5 sentences and they've all got parentheses. And now we are ready to get stuck in with analogies. So, an analogy is a comparison of two things to highlight their similarities. Could you pause the video and get this definition copied down into your books so we can refer back to it throughout the lesson? Pause the video and copy that down now. Okay, if you're back, you've got the definition of an analogy copied down. Some of you might be thinking, well, madam, isn't a comparison of two things to highlight their similarities just a metaphor? And there is some differences that I would like to highlight. So, an analogy is a comparison where an idea or thing is compared to another thing that is quite different from it. A metaphor is a literary device that compares two things without the use of connecting words like or as. So the point is with an analogy is you draw upon quite drastic or unique things to draw a comparison. And we'll look at that when we look at some examples later. An analogy is also much more elaborate and extensive than a metaphor. It's often extended through a longer section of writing, whereas a metaphor normally is one line, one sentence. And an analogy can use literary devices like similes and metaphors, but metaphors are used to create analogies. So I think the key thing to kind of draw out here is that an analogy is something that's extended, it's more elaborate, and it can use literary devices, whereas a metaphor is a literary device itself. Don't worry if you still feel a bit confused, it's going to become a lot clearer when we look at some examples. So let's read this example analogy. This is for a non-fiction response, talking about volunteering for the protection of vulnerable animals. We can compare the problem of abandoned animals on our streets to weeds in a garden. Weeds spoil the appearance of a well-ordered lawn, and gardeners use harsh methods to get rid of these weeds. However, many of these weeds might be, in fact, pretty wild flowers. Now, compare weeds to the problem of abandoned animals. Animals on the street could become a major headache for councils who try to keep our streets tidy. Volunteering with charities will help to remove animals from the street and make sure they are appreciated and loved. Then we have another example of an analogy. Just ignore this section at the bottom for now. This is surrounding the benefits of the internet. Let's not forget another key crutch to help the nervous teenager, the internet. The internet can be compared to a trusty friend. A friend will guide you through the maze of adolescence by whispering wise advice in your ear. Compare this to the internet. At one click of a button, you are launched into a stream of like-minded people with whom you can share your concerns and communicate. And the best advantage of all, the internet won't judge you or tell you off if you're making the wrong decisions. Okay, so these are both examples of analogies, and they both compare two things to highlight something particular about their argument. So what I would like you to do now is complete this sentence starter based on both analogies. So for this analogy, you're going to write the analogy compares X to Y in order to highlight. And then for this analogy, you're going to do the same thing. So producing a total of 2 sentences. Pause the video and spend about 3 minutes completing this task now. Okay, so you should have figured out that the analogy is comparing weeds in a garden to the problem of abandoned animals, and that is in order to highlight the necessity of volunteering with charities to help remove animals from the street and make sure they are appreciated and loved. And this one is comparing the internet to a trusty friend to highlight the benefits of the internet for nervous teenagers. Pause the video and make any purple pen corrections that you need to based on what I just said now. Okay, so we can see the analogies here. Now, how are we going to write one? We are going to create a checklist now that is going to be used to write an analogy. So, what I would like you to do, just for about a minute, I would like you to pause the video and read through one of the analogies and consider the steps that this person has taken to introduce their analogy, explore their analogy, to explain their analogy. Both of these have used the same structure to write an analogy. So what steps have they taken to explore it? Pause the video and spend about a minute having a reflection on that. Okay, so you should have reflected about the structure of these analogies, and that should give you a basis to write a checklist. And I'm going to do that with you now. So let me grab a highlighter. So I think the best thing to do is to kind of separate it down. So I'm going to base my checklist off of the example on the left-hand side, just because both of them are the same. So we have our first sentence here. We can compare the problem of abandoned animals on our streets to weeds in a garden. Then we have our second section here. I'll explain to you why I'm separating it in this way. Clearly I can't use a highlighter today because I don't know what's happening. There we go, that's better. Just colour that in, that's a second section there. Then we have another section here. Another section here. And then our final section at the bottom here. I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to rub this out because it is driving me insane how messy it is. Clearly, I don't know how long it's going to take me to be able to use the pen on this laptop properly, but I'm sure I'll get there eventually. I just need some practice. All right, much better. So, as you can see, I've kind of separated this down into sections. Now, I'm going to create a checklist based on this. So I would say that step one, based on the yellow sentence, we can compare the problem of abandoned animals on our streets to weeds in a garden. I would say that this is an introduction of the analogy. Introduce the comparison being made. All right, I've got the first one down. Could you pause the video and copy that one down in your books also, please? Okay, so number two is that orange section there. And it's exploring weeds. So it's explaining the first thing in the analogy. So it's explaining the first part of the analogy, the thing that we are comparing to. Pause the video and copy that down, please. Okay, and then we reinforce With the green sentence, it's like we're going to reinforce the link between the two things by saying, now compare this to this. Let's just squeeze this on the end there. Pause the video and copy that step down now. And then number 4, we have the blue section there where we explain the second part of the analogy. So the thing that we are comparing the first part to. Pause the video and copy that step down now. And then finally, in that red sentence, we use the analogy to reinforce our overall argument, focusing on our point of view or our agreement or disagreement with the statement. Pause the video and get that last step down now. Okay, so now we've got a checklist, we've seen how it's used, we know what an analogy is. I am going to write one for you using this checklist to show you how it's done. So I'm going to use my checklist to write an analogy based on this statement here. Gossip is a dangerous weapon, especially in schools. Whispers, rumours and group chats control how people feel more than you'd imagine. Write an article for your school website giving your views. Okay, and I'm just going to end the slideshow so I can add a text box and type so it's a little bit clearer, because as you know, me and the pen aren't best friends. All right, so I've got my checklist open on another screen. So the first thing I need to do is introduce the comparison. So I need to compare gossip to something else. Now, interestingly, this statement says that gossip is a dangerous weapon, so I'm going to use that as my analogy. We can compare playground gossip to a dangerous weapon. Simple. Introduction of my comparison, done. Now I'm going to explore the first thing that I am comparing gossip to, which is dangerous weapons. So I'm going to explain the concept of a dangerous weapon, but I need to pay particular attention to how that links to gossip. I'm not going to talk about the intricacies of the dangerous weapon. I'm not going to talk about how dangerous weapons are made. I need to talk about how dangerous weapons compare to gossip. So I'm going to focus on how weapons are used and for what impact. So I'm going to write weapons are used with malice and vicious intentions by cruel people. By cruel people who want to cause harm and pain to those on the receiving end. Okay, that's the second part of my checklist done, explaining the first thing. Now I'm going to reinforce the link. Now, compare this to rumours and whispers. And there I'm using language from the statement. Now I need to explain the second part of my analogy, so explain how the first thing links to my argument about gossip. So I'm going to write, if one person decides to say one thing about another person, comma, this can instantly be spread across friendship groups like wildfire. It's a nice little simile there as well. And then I'm going to say it creates cruel and sinister rumours that cause the subjects of those rumours to feel an abundance of emotions. Embarrassment, pain, using the same language as I used to describe the weapon, so show the link, melancholy, and disgrace. Oh, actually, I might do like self-loathing. Self-loathing. Then my final step is to reinforce my overall argument. Therefore, schools should provide further support for helpless students who are the unfortunate victims of such nasty rumours. And done. There is my analogy using the checklist, drawing a comparison between gossip and dangerous weapons. Now it is your turn. So you are going to use the checklist that you've got written down to write analogies for 2 of these statements below. The reason I've said 2 out of the 3 is because I want you to choose the 2 that you feel like you could create an analogy for yourself. Obviously, before you write your analogy, you need to decide on your argument, because that will form the focus of your analogy and indicate the direction of your analogy. So you can write an analogy for the statement, homework is a tedious, stressful and burdensome chore. Some pupils do it, others never do it. The tension it creates between pupils and teachers isn't worth it. You can do an analogy for, I can't understand why we have pets. They're expensive, time consuming and children get easily tired of them. Or you can write your analogy for, energy drinks are essentially toxic. The sugar and caffeine is harmful and addictive. They should be banned. So choose 2 of the statements. Now write 2 of the analogies. When you've done that, come back to the video, please. Okay, if you're back, that means you've written your 2 analogies, and now it is time to submit. Please make sure your subject of the email looks like this and attach a clear picture of your work. I look forward to seeing your interesting analogies in my inbox, and I will speak to you very soon.